Assalamualaikum and good morning, Malaysia. Welcome to Zaid Ibrahim Podcast. This morning, we have a special guest, Mr. Jaleel Rasheed. He's a corporate man through and through. And we're going to talk a bit about this country, of course, our economy, our policies, our shortcomings, our strengths, and so on and so forth. But before I dive into that, I would like Rasheed Jaleel to tell a bit more about himself, if you please. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dato', for having me on the show. So, as many would know, I was here in Malaysia from like 2019 to about 2022. Mainly, many of you would have known me as a Group CEO of Permohonan National Berhad, and then subsequent to that, as the Group CEO of Berjaya Corporation. But I was born here, I was raised here, I went to a local school here in Petaling Jaya, Lasal PJ. And then I started working in the investment world for two foreign firms, which was an eye-opener for me. So I spent 20 years in public markets and private markets, traveling the world, looking at how companies operated, seeing whether they were investable. I spent a lot of time on governance issues, which equipped me well when I came back and took on the PNB job and subsequent Berjaya. And 2.5 years ago, I moved back to Singapore, where I was for about 7 years before I moved to Malaysia, where for the last 2.5 years, I now run the Tony Blair Institute, which is a government advisory firm founded by the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. And my primary job there is advising presidents and prime ministers around the world on national strategy, policy, and implementation work. So essentially telling presidents what is it that they need to prioritize as a leader of their country, what are the solutions to those priority issues, and most importantly, implementation. Because as we know, a lot of the problems in the world that we see today is not because governments don't have a plan or they don't have the solution, it's because they can't implement. So implementation is the most important thing, and that's what we focus on every single day. And yeah, that's what I do now.
Oh, very impressive CV. Yes. I wish I have half of that. But okay, so that makes it very suitable for us to discuss. The first thing I want to ask you is this. Almost every prime minister, after having won the election, they will say they want to do this great thing, they want to do this great thing. They want to do everything under the sun.
Yeah.
And somehow, from my own observation and my own understanding of how the outcome so far, I think we are way below our optimum capacity. Malaysia is really, I think, could have done better compared to other countries in the region.
Yeah.
And for all the potential, for all the resources, for all the kind of the strength of our people, you put all that together, we're just not pushing ourselves to the optimum. Why is that so?
Yeah. So I love a good pun, so I'm going to give one. I think for not just governments, this is not a unique Malaysian problem. Every government in the world faces that problem of being able to implement things that they need to implement. And there's a whole range of issues there. And it's also the same in the business world. If any CEO came on in the job and said, I'm going to tackle 100 things, chances are you're not going to get anything done. But if you say, I'm going to focus on 3 things and I'm going to do it well, you're going to do it well. I always tell my colleagues is that whenever we were brainstorming an issue, I said, list down every single problem, whether it's minute, small, large, structural, list it down. And when we listed it down, we collated everything. And then we asked, against every problem, I asked the question, how is this going to move the needle? Like, if we solve this problem, is it going to solve anything? No. Strike it out, strike it out, strike it out, strike it out. You are then left perhaps 4 or 5 issues. That's what leaders should focus on. Whether you're in corporate, whether you're in government. So I always say for every leader, the first P is prioritization. What do you need to prioritize? As important as it is to prioritize, it's very important to deprioritize as well. I know the inertia is there to say, I want to do everything, but you can't, right? Let's just be realistic. Or 5-year term, you need to get re-elected, but you need to deliver. So you need to prioritize. Second is your personnel. Do you have the right personnel to be able to implement what you want? And these are the key people. And again, that requires you to relook at your team, your bench team. Who are you surrounding yourself with? Are these people capable? Do they get the brief? Again, it's the same in government as it is in the corporate world. Third is policies. Do we have the right policies? And I've seen this in the job that I do now, is that there's a lot of mismatch between what the government wants from a macro perspective. For example, some governments would say, I want 30 billion of FDI to come in. Then when you look at the policies, there will be countries that don't allow foreign investors to set up an entity. They don't allow you to bring, skilled workers in. There's lack of infrastructure that deters people from wanting to move to those countries. So all these sort of things are policies that you need to make sure jives with your macro. So there's a nice segue from a macro and micro. So policy is third. And the last one is performance management. You need to make sure all these things follow through and get implemented. You've prioritized now, you know what you want to do. You've got the people in place. You've got the policies. Now you need to deliver and you need to monitor this. It's very easy to announce something and then say, okay, it's happening. But then 6 months later, someone's like, what actually happened to that announcement? So that's why there needs to be a relentless kind of process where we are actually monitoring this. And it's okay if things don't work. Things don't always work. It's okay. But being able to monitor that, you say, it's not working, I am going to pivot this. I'm going to strike it out. It's not working. Let's pivot. So that is what I feel is lacking. And there is no secret recipe of why governments around the world, the one who does well, do well. They do well purely based on good governance. That's it, right? That is a single recipe.
Okay. Let's start with the priorities.
Yeah.
Okay. What if I were to ask you the 3 most important things this country needs to do now? What are they?
I think cost of living issue is a big issue, right? And we've spoken about the middle income trap so many times over the last 20 years. Is that our wages have not moved up in tandem, in proportion with inflation, and there are structural issues with it, but we've not been aggressive enough with policies to say, this has moved up, we need to move this up, right? So we need to be a lot more aggressive with that. We also need to think about why are prices rising? Are we importing too many things? And I've not dug deep into it, but I can give a good sense that a lot of things we consume on a daily basis, we're importing. And a lot of things we can actually produce here, we can plant here, so that needs to be a priority, to come and have a rethink. Why are prices going up, and can we import these? Can we make it locally? And then also to think about a progressive wage structure that goes in tandem. The middle income trap really happens because your wages are here, your inflation level is here.
Yeah.
That gap is your middle income. And if you keep your wages stagnant and your inflation goes up, that gap is just getting larger and larger and larger. But this is a long-term solution that needs to be done. You can't just go to companies and say, increase your wages by 300%. They'll all be out of business. But you can say, increase it slowly. But at a certain point by 2030, it needs to be this. Now, what happens when you do that is that everyone's going to be up in arms about it. That's when firm, decisive decision making makes sure that it is implemented. So one thing is on that. Second is also to think about what are the kind of investments that we want to attract as a country. And again, this is where prioritization is very important. Do we have the right skill sets, right? If we're planning to bring in a big tech company to invest in the country, Do we
That's the sexy one.
it's always there's always something that is very sexy, is a flavor of the day. But do we have 3,000-4,000 skilled engineers that we can offer, right? And if we don't, it's okay. That's the reality of the situation. We'll go back and think about what we can do. I'd like to see Malaysia do more in the value-added space, especially with commodities. Right? We're very blessed as a country with all sorts of commodities. I don't think we're doing enough with the value add. We export too many things in its raw form. And then we buy back the finished product from other countries.
We buy back the soap.
We buy back the soap. We buy back the cooking oil.
We buy back
so we should be having those industries, because the raw material is grown here, is produced here, is refined here. We should be making it. So those are things where I feel that we already have things in place. The policies are there. The companies are there. It just requires a lot more stricter coordination enable to do that. Third is, if you look at all this, the success to good countries in the future is a good education system. And I think, we just need to have an honest conversation with ourselves whether the system has really kept up with what we need as a country. And I think my thinking is that we do need to make a big revamp there.
Okay, I just want to come back to this, the problem of, it sounds very obvious. Why don't we plant our own beras, plant our own chili, plant our own onion, plant our own this. And then I remember discussing this with some of those people who then say, when I asked them, why don't we plant our own jagung, for example? They say, there's a cost, a comparative cost. It's cheaper if we buy it from Argentina. And then they'll have all sorts of problem. They say, tanah kita tak cukup, and so on and so forth. All sorts of excuses. Now, I would have thought that if we would have our own, like India, India is a good example, where I remember 15 years ago, about that, they just don't have enough even rice for themselves.
Yeah.
They had to import rice. They had to import a lot of things, Now, they are exporter, that. And if you can grow all these things in India, which is actually not the kind of soil we have, not the kind of weather we have, not the kind of rain we have, why can't we do it?
Yeah.
So what's the reason for that?
There's something called an approved permit in this country, where everything that is imported requires an approved permit, right?
Yeah.
So if we go down list by list of what are we importing as a country and who's bringing it, there's somebody that has benefited from it. So there's probably a bit of a resistance to kind of change that. There's also probably, to be fair to people, also a lack of maybe incentives to maybe encourage them to do so, right? Because we're thinking about, kita tanam kelapa sawit because, per ton it makes a lot of money, we don't instinctively think about, sawi or bayam or chili or onions, right? And that is where I think we need to kind of incentivize. We got land, Felda gives a lot of land, whether that land, and we got a lot of fertile land, whether that land is being used for the right reason, and people are also being educated on what a right sort of usage of the land is a big problem. Now, once you've gotten that sort of infrastructure and got people getting on that bandwagon of planting and growing things, you need to be able to have a mechanism that enables them to sell directly to the consumer and not through a middleman. That's also another problem sometimes, we see a lot of this in the fishing industry, where fishermen, have to sell through a middleman, but if they were to sell it directly, they would make a lot more money. And we talk about diesel.
Yeah, diesel.
A lot of them make more money
Unfortunately,
selling their diesel because it's far more lucrative selling their diesel than going out into the water at 2 a.m. and doing something dangerous for what isn't really bringing a lot of money, right? So there's a few things here. One is that we're giving the land. Are we saying that this land should be used for this purpose? And giving them the right tools and incentive. We, as a country, we give a lot of incentives. I think that's not the problem. We give a lot. Question is, are we giving it to the right people and are we giving the right sort? Second is also the mechanism to enable them to then sell. one of the things I remember in the past that wanted to be done was a free school program, free school meal program, which now our neighbors in Indonesia is doing. And one of that was centered on not just making sure that kids were properly fed in school, given nutritious meal, but it also enabled a farm to table concept. So, for example, if you had a school in, I don't know, Kuala Kangsar somewhere, you could use the local farmers to to supply directly to the school. So that enabled an ecosystem that would encourage people to kind of grow, although you were small time farmers and everything. And also, I think in a mentality point of view, it's okay to be a small time farmer, right? I think there's a bit of an obsession that if you go in, you need to go in big, you need to plant 100 acres, and it throws people off, right? So that's where I feel that we have a big opportunity, and it just requires policy intervention. It doesn't require us to go from scratch and rethink.
Yeah.
It's already there. It just requires a bit of a tightening and saying we should be doing this. We saw firsthand during COVID what our food security is like, and it's not great.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of countries realized that during COVID, that it's like, when the borders were closed, we were like, where's our vegetable coming from? Where's our food coming from? So we should really think about that going forward.
Yeah. Okay. It's the central issue, I think, is that to have good governance and to do the right thing, to have the right policies, to have the right people, to have the right performance management scheme, to prioritize, all requires a very fundamental shift in the way we do things. Because you see, Jaleel, in Malaysia, it's a Malay first country. I mean, that's the only way I can describe it. And there are some good things about that policy, but there are a lot of bad things about that policy. So when the Malay first comes into play, it is what kind of Malays that gets the benefit. That's one. It is also at the expense of legitimate expectations of the others, the non-Malays.
Yeah.
And this is the biggest problem we have. And yet, this is one thing, no government, no leader, no matter how reformist he sounds, is going to tweak it. Never mind tweaking it, it's not going to even touch it. How do you overcome this, in my view, the greatest barrier to progress in this country? This false sense of entitlement, privileges, and all that, which was never intended to be that way. I mean, if you studied 153 properly, and writers and people, thinkers have spoken about these special privileges, what it was meant to be, how it's to be managed. We are not going back there. We are just taking the easy way. Easy way is, I decide. Now, how do we break this barrier?
Requires very strong will in the leadership in wanting to get this done. Again, I say it requires a tweak. So, for example, 70% of this country almost are Malay Muslims. So even if you say on a needs-based basis, purely needs-based, the beneficiaries are still going to be at least about 70% are going to be Malay. So it's not going to fundamentally change the alteration. Even if you say, okay, let's go away from race and let's go purely on needs and merits, it's still, the end result would still mirror that, right? So, and then you take a few steps backwards. Let's take construction, which is a classic case of, 100 million ringgit contract. I can incorporate my company yesterday and then bid for a project, and I get the project, then I subcon it. That's the typical way of doing it. We can have policies that says you can't subcon this, right? If you're starting out as a contractor, you got to take smaller projects. You got to prove your ability, your word, before you can move up the scale. So that's not saying I'm denying you. That's saying I'm actually kind of forcing you to create that skill set and know-how, so that you're not taking advantage of this. And again, that's you're not taking away something from someone, but you're kind of forcing them to rethink and pivot in a different way. So that are policy tweaks within the current framework that can be done very easily. But again, I say it requires a lot of will and leadership, because a lot of people are not going to like it. But the ones who are not going to like it are a small group of people, I'd say, but they're a vocal group of people. The ones who will actually benefit from this will be massive amount of people who actually want that opportunity. And I've seen that in my past life as well, about how many people that we have given opportunity, whether it's a scholarship, for a very poor child in somewhere in Malaysia, or whether it's a small time contractor who got his big day delivering a successful project. They've gone on for bigger things, right? So there are success factors. There are success factors here that we need to kind of move forward with. I think the other thing I always say is that all this will be naught if we don't really think about our education system.
Yeah.
Right? Our education system needs to be rethought, rethink, because and this requires, again, a lot of patience and will, because a product of your education system is going to come out into the workforce in 20 years' time.
Yes.
So you can't expect miracles by changing it and then saying, it's going to become better next year. And it also involves us rethinking what we need to do to be one step ahead. So it's a two-pronged thing. I don't think it's impossible. But I also think it's possible handling this sensitive thing in a way that won't be terribly disruptive. But the question is whether anyone wants to tackle the poison chalice or not.
Okay, so that's one problem. I think the major problem, which, as you said, we can be hopeful. The other problem I see that's must be difficult to address is this. You remember you talk about this disparity in wages and inflation, and that we can't push the wage up and all that. And I think the main thing, in my view, is because we have so many foreign workers.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't even know. Some people say 2 million, some people say 3 million. And that's because of corruption, I think. Yeah. Now, if you bring in foreign workers from Bangladesh, how do you expect the employer, when he has an option to pay less, why should he pay more?
Yeah.
So that's one. And I can't see how foreign workers issue can be resolved because of corruption.
Yeah.
And for so long as you have these foreigners here who are willing to obviously work harder, because he left his family, his wife, children, obviously he works harder.
Yeah.
And he's willing to take less. So he's going to depress wages. And so we end up having, locals probably doing delivery work, gig economy, that kind of stuff. Now, I was talking to someone who was involved in this study of the foreign workers issue in this country. That was 3 years ago. And there were recommendations here outlined. But until today, when there are press statement or joint press statement between Works Minister, or rather Home Minister and the Works Minister, there will be statements about this and that. But there's no real implementation. Okay, that is also difficult. Now, the other point that I just want to ask you your view is that corruption is pervasive because we live in a secret environment.
Yeah.
Everything is secret.
Yeah.
The official secrets. No freedom of information in this country. You cannot access information. Whistleblowers Act not really working because they don't protect those people. There's a lot of exclusion in the act. It's not really effective. How do you think, or rather, again, you can say the leader who's very strong can change all that. But why would he change if his survival is more important to him than doing good? And his survival means more oppressive laws, less transparency, more this, more control. So I'm saying all this because I'm venting out my frustration because I'm not very hopeful like you. But tell me, there is a way out.
Yeah, I'm an internal optimist that way. So making lives of citizens and the people better and just making their daily experience better is going to keep you in power, right? Because at the end of the day, when people vote, they're going to think about, how has my life changed the last 5 years, right? Do I really care how much investments the country has brought in? It's important, don't get me wrong, it's important, but at the end of the day, it doesn't benefit me from a selfish point of view, right? Has my wages improved? Can I afford some nice things? Can I take my family for a holiday, right? Am I living month to month? These are all pertinent issues, right? And ease of doing work. So, for example, corruption. I always say, being able to your point about transparency, one thing is to start digitizing stuff. So in a lot of countries, a lot of the smaller corruptions have actually fallen because we cut away the middleman. So you're now able to do a government transaction directly online. You pay online, so there's no one
there's no one to collect.
Collect cash and dropping it into a drawer somewhere. So everything is online, and there's a digital footprint on everything. So those are smaller steps. You get all the government services to be digitized. Then you start putting your approval processes online, your tenders online. Then when people get used to transparency, it's very hard to take it back. You have to up the ante all the time. Then people want better transparency, governance, and everything. So it slowly moves up, right? It's good for the people. When it's good for the people, it's good for you. I always say that I think if you're doing something good, you will survive. The longevity would be there. The problem is that I think when you're thinking about, let's not do this, but let's also not make people's life better, that's a double whammy that's going to result in a train wreck. So I think there are ways to do it, and we've seen this in many countries. And look, no country is perfect as well. There's no country that has gotten that element of transparency and efficiency to that high, but also got an environment where people are so free and going around doing whatever they want. There is a balancing act, obviously, right? So you get something good in this, something needs to be tweaked in this, and that's just a reality of life. And I think people will be fine about that. People will be fine about that, if they see that, hey, my taxpayers' money is being used properly, it's fine. I don't mind paying taxes. We always talk about this issue in there's always this question in the Nordic countries about why is it that they're willing to pay 40-50% taxes? Because they see where their money is going.
Yes.
They see where their money is going. So I don't mind. I've got an amazing education and healthcare system. It's safe. Transportation is great, everything. So I don't mind paying it. So it's a trust building exercise that needs to be done, and it starts with always the smaller things in making small things better for people, their experience and everything, and then they trust, and then you tackle the bigger stuff. And I think a lot of people fail and get overwhelmed is that they want to tackle the big stuff immediately, and you can't. That's just the reality. You just need to do smaller stuff and lead to the bigger stuff. But it requires, I guess, also consistency in policy, and that's why I'm a big advocate of countries having a proper national strategy. That it needs to outlive incumbents, right? It needs to outlive incumbents. That this is the vision that we're going. So someone coming in maybe tweak certain things from an implementation point of view, but goes forward. So it requires maturity.
Sure.
Right? It requires maturity. Maybe we're not there yet.
Yeah. Okay. You are well traveled, Jaleel, you work overseas. You've seen the world. And that's why I think you are in a good position to tell me. I've read reports that there's a lot of Malays, never mind Malaysian, a lot of Malays have gone out of this country.
Yeah.
Looking for better job, better wages, better education. I don't know why. And that's worrying to me because, I mean, if in the 80s, if the Chinese were to move to Australia, the Malays would say, they're not loyal. No nationalism, no patriotism, blah, blah, blah. But today, it's the Malays who are leaving the country. Now, can you Enlighten me a bit.
Yeah.
Whether what I know is correct.
Look, I don't have numbers at my fingertips, but I've witnessed this, from travels and seeing, and I've met amazing Malaysians in my travels overseas, and I've met amazing Malays in my travels overseas. So this thing about kita suka duduk kat negara kita, we don't like. It's not right. I think there are a lot of ambitious people who want to go out there and earn money, and I think there is a fundamental reason for that, is that they probably feel they're not earning enough in this country doing what they do, and they don't mind. Like, I don't want to be known as the person who has a crutch. I'm able to go there, compete internationally, get the job, and have a good life for my children. I say every generation that comes in, everywhere around the world, is better and better and better. My grandparents' generation, my father was better off than my grandfather. I'm better off than my dad. My kids would end up being better than me. So that's how you kind of move the economic prosperity down. So all these people thinking about better livelihoods are thinking about that, right? It's like, I'm educated, husband and wife, we're earning well, but we're not earning that well. But we want to give our kids something better. So we're moving out. I can earn more money. So that's really happening. And I think the fundamental reason is not because people, are utterly disappointed with the country. It's just that, the wages are just not increasing. KL is not a cheap city to live if you earn in ringgit, right? It's a cheap city when you think about if you earn in US dollars and you come and retire here. Yes, it's nice, it's affordable, but if you're earning in ringgit, and that needs to be the key priority for anybody, because you have to run the country with the mind that you're running it for the people, for your citizens, and it needs to be affordable for your citizens. Not affordable for other people.
Not for the foreigners.
Not affordable for other people, right? And that's why people are going out. So I think as we get into an era where people are much more educated, better informed, that lines between in the past where certain races used to move and certain races used to stay, that line is slowly disappearing. It's slowly disappearing, and it's all on, we're moving for economic prosperity, for better education. I want to raise my kids in a different environment and everything. And you shouldn't call them less patriotic. I think it's just a function of how this world works right now, which is very global. And I always joke to people who ask me, to people who are not very familiar with Malaysia, when I speak to foreigners and I say, what's your biggest export? I say, it's our people. We have an amazing group of people, right? Close to probably about 1 million people overseas doing all sorts of work. So we're not short of that. We just need to find a way to make sure that they stay in the country.
They stay,
or people who go out, not to shun them, to make sure they're still contributing back to the country, right? And we're seeing this in a lot of countries as well, like India, Singapore. They're actually telling their citizens, go out there, gain your experience, but make sure you come back and contribute. Make sure you come back and contribute, right? So I think we also need to change, kind of our communication and stance in the way when people go out of the country, that you're still Malaysians, please come back and contribute. But then, and I say this from my own experience as someone who has been out of the country and who came back and then went back out, is that the longer you stay in an environment which is comfortable, conducive, the longer you're away, it becomes difficult to come back home. Especially when you're seeing that there are not many changes happening since you left. So that is what is going to drift people away. Everyone goes with the idea, I'm going to be there for 2, 3 years, 4 years, I'm going to come back, right? And now, when they're away for a long time, it becomes difficult to come back. Yeah.
Okay, Rasheed, I think we have covered a fair bit of areas. It's very nice talking to you, and I hope we can do this chat again when you're back in Malaysia.
Yeah.
Right? And there are a lot of other things I want to ask you, but I think that should suffice for now. And like I said, I hope we can talk about other things. Especially, I don't like this idea that the government is doing a lot of business themselves. I'm anti that. I rather have the people doing the business rather than the government. But that's a long topic in itself. So we'll touch on that in your next trip. Thank you very much for your.
Thank you for having me on the show.
And I have a small present for you.
Yeah.
A cap.
I know. I've seen that cap before.
I have a cat for you, which I gave to my guest. And there's nothing racial about this. It says, make the Malays great.
And there's no reason why it can't happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. The reason I put that is because the people say that, why don't you talk about Malaysian? I said, yeah, but you got to start from the first base. And because Malays are the one that is probably more delicate or more challenged in many ways, education, values, and that sort of thing, cultural, historical, blah, blah, blah. If you don't transform the Malays, the core component of society, then you cannot transform this country. That's all I said. So I'm giving you this hat. You're not a golfer.
No, I'm a terrible golfer.
You're not. You don't have time.
Yeah,
should play golf.
even if I have time, I kind of embarrass myself in my golf swing.
No. You must play. When you reach my age, you'll appreciate what I'm telling you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right.